Now before I start this video, this series will revolve around the intricacies of world building on the micro level, directed at benefiting any D&D dungeon masters, fantasy writers, or anyone else that finds the information here useful or relevant for their purposes. But with that being said, we shall continue. Your world is alive, and its people need to eat, and technology needs to develop slowly but surely. If your world has progressed past the stage of hunters and gatherers, then trade is a very important part of it. Whether by land or by sea, goods from all over your known world will be imported and exported all the time. So if these trade hubs are directly or indirectly related to your story you want to tell, what would these places look like? Well, no matter what time period your story takes place in, these sites will be relatively booming. These places will be very populated and congested. You could expect to see some squalor from any vagabonds that try to eke out a living by begging on the busy streets, and a sizable amount of low-income housing that are employed to keep the buying and selling of local as well as foreign goods running smoothly. Crime will also be a factor to focus on in these environments, and perhaps the endeavors of the local guards or any variant of law enforcement. The streets will be filled for the vast majority of the day with trade convoys/caravans, pack animals, civilians streaming alongside trying to go about their business, as well as static merchants shouting and trying to advertise their products. So let's have an in-depth look at sea trading hubs. So we're going to be looking at big harbors and a lot of taverns for voyaging sailors. These streets, especially those nearest to the harbor, are going to be dirty and inhabited by rats. Drunk sailors will be a common sight wandering the streets near the harbor at night, as well as beggars who try to take advantage of those with coin, or maybe tourists if the port city has any religious or cultural significance in your world. If the technology in your world is advanced enough, heavy equipment such as harbor cranes, which were invented in the 6th century in our world, would be relevant to mention. Docks will be separated for their different usages, such as trade, civilian ships, fishing vessels, etc. If your story comes to a point where your characters are arriving by boat, describe the skyline, or if it's a place with a focus on fishing, describe the stench from all the way offshore and as you approach. For examples of all this, we can think of Carthage, Alexandria, and Ostia Antica for antiquity, and Genoa, Venice, and Istanbul for anything medieval. If your world is futuristic, the necessity of sea trade will be relatively minuscule, especially if the people in your world are spacefaring ones. But that doesn't mean it is irrelevant. It just gives us a whole new context of the word port. On your planet, the flatness of most coastal areas, right off an ocean or a sea, could provide convenient locations for large hangar bays to commence in commerce with a large population that's going to be dwelling in that city. Also, the possibility for underground/underwater construction can be used as you, the creator of the world, sees fit. But following the futuristic narrative, we can also consider space stations. Now, assuming the primary function of the space station is for trading purposes, they could be less dense in population than a planetary city, but could possibly be teeming with exotic and rare artifacts from all over your known galaxy. Now, I hesitate to speak generically on this because, again, it can look however you want. Whether the space station is a really gross and crowded antique store in space, or a glistening learning center for intellectuals, or anything between, is completely at your discretion. When it comes to a trade hub that's completely land-based, it would be expected that there'll be multiple roads or trade routes going through this singular point. These land trade hubs will be quite a bit rarer than its port counterparts and can be a good candidate for a regional or provincial capital because it's much less vulnerable to an invasion force. Within these cities, craftsmen and merchants will be very prevalent. Products will not only be constantly flowing through this area, but the products will also be produced here as well. These locations can be very pivotal when it comes to not only the economy of the realm, but also it can be a priority target in war or a center for religious or cultural relevance. And since it is a hub, and the populations will be somewhat similar to those of the port trading hubs, there'll be a lot of things going on all around the city. Think religious festivals or actions of government such as executions or a town crier reading the new laws aloud to the people. Also, don't neglect your side streets or alleyways. Some of the most fun and interesting things can happen off the beaten path. Real-world examples of all this could include Vienna, Krakow, or Paris. When dealing with a futuristic land trading center, they also have the potential to have a very high crime rate because of the flow of resources and the greater vastness of the urban area. Also, the multi-level transport lanes should be considered. Think Coruscant, like hovering vehicles that are flying at various altitudes in lieu of actual physical roads. And with the same train of thought, multiple entrances at different heights of buildings would be relevant as well. Perhaps a semi-coordinated criminal underground or any number of secretive societies or organizations. There could also be if the top levels are very disconnected from the bottom levels or vice versa, there could be civil wars happening or complete breakdowns of society that are going on certain levels of your world. If it's something like akin to a mega city, which people above or below could have no idea about. Overall, when designing or making your way through the course you've set, attention to relevant and game-changing detail will not soon be forgotten. Introduce your players or audience to factors that they may not immediately consider until the effects of it are unfolding around them. The presence of trade hubs on the sea, or trade hubs inland, or trade hubs in space can dictate in your world which nations have the most wealth and the most influence. In an upcoming video, I'll go into detail about commerce guilds and trading companies having to do with what it takes to keep these trade hubs functioning, profitable, and efficient. Remember always to favorite and subscribe, like, favorite, subscribe, to keep up to date with new videos and how to improve the world that you are creating.